So my name is Alex Keaty. I'm the Director of Strategic Operations at a company called ZeroFox. And I have the pleasure of introducing Renata Spinks today. And I have a brief bio. She's done a lot of amazing things, but just to highlight some of those achievements. Until recently, Renata served as the Assistant Director of IT and was the Deputy CIO for the US Marine Corps. She was the nation's first cyber technology officer, serving as the Marine Force's Cyberspace Command. Prior to her assignments, Renata served in the US Treasury, the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration, and Customs Enforcement, and in the US Army. She's a decorated combat veteran who says her love for cyber grew progressively, and as she ascended through the ranks, this grew even more. Earlier in her career, Renata was a criminal research specialist, utilizing computer forensics and human intelligence in support of human trafficking and child exploitation cases. I cannot think of anyone better to moderate this panel than my Uniting Women in Cyber colleague, Renata. So let's please welcome Renata.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks so much for you all being here and taking the time to learn about these two dynamic women that are going to join me on the stage in a few minutes during your lunch hour. So I want to tell you a secret. We knew it was going to be lunchtime, and we know you don't stand in between a person and their meal. However, we wanted to make sure that no matter how delicious your meal is, you had extra enjoyment of these two boss ladies that I'm gonna bring on stage. So come on up, Tanya and Heather. They're gonna join me on stage, and I'm gonna do a little bit of an introduction, and then we're gonna dive right in. As they're coming, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about these two dynamic people. Come on up. They're gonna stand up here with me as I serenade them first, and then we're gonna have a seat later. Take your spot, go, boss ladies. So Tanya, I want to introduce you guys to Tanya Gould. She's a solutionist fighting against human trafficking and striving to impact legislation. We just heard about legislation earlier today. Legislative policy and raise public awareness. She is the anti-human trafficking director for the Attorney General of Virginia and served on the Governor's Commission on Human Trafficking Prevention and Survivor Support. Yes, it's okay to clap. If that's not enough, Tanya she was recently appointed to the OSCE Office for Democratic Institution and Human Rights International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council. It's called ISTAC. In 2022, Tanya received the Presidential Award for extraordinary efforts to combat human trafficking in persons. She served 2 terms on the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, and she's given lectures, trainings at universities. She's been interviewed on an array of podcasts. She's contributed to many articles, and she also co-produced a documentary short film titled Groomed. Her daughter wrote, arranged, and performed all of the songs on the film. Everybody give it up for Miss Tanya Gould. Superstar. So I can't say superstar number 1 and superstar number 2 because they're both just doing some great things in such an egregious space, right? It's a space that's really after my own heart. And these two women share those same passion. Ladies and gentlemen, Heather Fischer. Heather Fischer is the Senior Advisor for Human Rights Crimes at Thomson Reuters Special Services. Fischer currently serves on the Thomson Reuters Special Services Executive Leadership Team, informing its work on the intersection of national security and human rights crimes, including human trafficking and child exploitation. Additionally, she leads the company's strategy to promote women, peace, and security. Prior to joining, she recently served as the United States government's White House Special Advisor for Human Trafficking. In this capacity as the Human Trafficking Czar, she coordinated the Executive Office of the President and the 20 federal agencies on the President's Interagency Task Force to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. She also, previously to that, served as the Ambassador at Large to monitor and combat trafficking in persons at the U.S. State Department. She also held advisory roles at the McCain Institute for International Leadership at Arizona State University and at Love 146, which is a global nonprofit company dedicated to combating child sex trafficking and exploitation. There's a ton of more accomplishments in her bio that you'll be able to find later once I post it to my website, because I like to add dynamic people to my contacts. But for right now, that's as much as we're going to give you for the bio. We're going to sit down now. They're going to answer some questions that I have pulled together. We only practice 4, so they are in for a rude awakening. Have a seat, ladies.
Really, all you need to know about me is that I'm Tanya's friend.
And
that's enough.
And I share the platform with these 2 great ladies. So we're going to talk a little bit about the role of cyber, and the role of cyber that is used as a tool by perpetrators, and is also a powerful tool for human trafficking and child exploitation. Those tools are ginormous. The tools, techniques, and protocols that are used are even more complex. So as we think about everything that's happening in this space, the realities of human trafficking and cyberspace present several challenges. And it is imperative that we have deliberate conversations about the way technology is used, as well as the things that we can do to combat the perpetrator's success. Based on your past and present roles, Heather, can you first share with us some of these realities that you focused your efforts on and some of the experiences that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, of course, and thank you so much for a great question. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I was really grateful when Debbie reached out and said that you all wanted to talk about the issue of human trafficking today. That's always encouraging for people like Tanya and I, who we really spend day-to-day thinking about these enormous and complex challenges. So first of all, it's great to be in a room full of amazing women leaders and the men allies that are here as well, and we're really thrilled to be here. So as you mentioned in my bio, really where I sit is on the nexus of national security and human trafficking. And if you are wondering what the 2 have to do with each other, I just want to paint you a little bit of a picture. Human trafficking globally, or modern slavery, is estimated to be 50 million victims per year worldwide. And these traffickers operate in the shadow economy. They are part of transnational organized crime. And the reason why they do it is not just because they're human rights violators, but it's very profitable. And so the International Labor Organization estimates that $150 billion each year, which I now think is a pretty low estimate, is being made in the informal economy off the backs of people. And that's expressed in 2 different ways, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which is forced labor, which we see every day in our supply chain security issues, and sex trafficking. So as you talked about, I actually started in the field. I worked with children, primarily in Southeast Asia and then in the US, and loved that work, and never thought that I would actually find myself in the national security space. But when I was living in New York, we stood up the first human trafficking task force. I was contacted by the FBI, and I said, I have no idea why you're calling me. I think you have the wrong girl. They said, no, we checked, we have the right person. And I didn't know it at the time, but this is very unique. You know, NGOs or nonprofits weren't routinely joining task forces. And it forced us to work together in a collaborative manner, and I'm so grateful that it did, because then I went on to spend 7 years working side by side with prosecutors, law enforcement, community leaders, to think about a systemic way to go upstream to stop human trafficking from happening in the state of New York. Fast forward, I come down to Washington, D.C. to work for Ambassador Cindy McCain at the McCain Institute. And there I'm really thinking about how do we put together a whole of government approach to combating human trafficking. So I actually started working with DHS first, and I think I was so bossy that they said, you need to come to the State Department and coordinate the president's task force. So while I was there, I was as you mentioned, very honored to be the first to serve as the White House czar for human trafficking and really think about how we could leverage the cabinet level and put together the first national action plan. So I don't want to bore you with policy wonkiness here today, but I will tell you that national action plan that we put together through the NSC process is something that still exists today. We didn't have it when I initially went into office, but it's something that we can hang our hat on, and now every agency knows what their marching orders is. So that's just one really practical example of a level set of what human trafficking is and one way in which we're trying to tackle it.
Thank you, Heather. Tanya, can you give us a little insight on your experiences as well?
So I'm going to bring it definitely in a different space, being a survivor. One of the, I guess I would say the greatest rewards in my life was mentoring kids who are identified as being trafficked through one of the largest child advocacy centers in the state of Virginia, or Commonwealth of Virginia. And while I was doing so, I also was, I started an after-school program in a very low economically set community in Virginia. And what I was seeing and experiencing, just the distraction of being online, right? And how things were shifting. I mean, for me, being a survivor of human trafficking, and I will never tell you how old I am, but I will say that I am ageless. When this was happening for me and being seen as a prostitute and as a criminal, things were different, but, things are still the same, right? So we try to change, we end up doing the same things. So I saw this shift where, predators, or traffickers, runners, those who are going after kids, younger kids, and grooming them, they were using online tactics to do so. And I got to see this firsthand. I got to see where at the after-school program where kids were posting nude pictures of themselves and passing them around. I got to talk to kids who are being identified as being trafficked and, learned how they were working with each other. Like, for an example, they would be going to the detention center for something else, truancy or whatever. When they would go to the detention center, they would work with other kids there because they had a trafficker behind scenes to tell them where they could go after they got out of the detention center and how they could, message each other and how to post your ad and how to put up pictures and, how to do it so that your face isn't shown. I mean, the kids know everything, they know what they need to do. So when I saw that, and for me, it made me angry, right? Because I'm doing the work that I'm doing because what happened to me was not okay. It was never okay. I live in America, not that it should happen anywhere, but we pride ourselves on a lot of things. So that having happened to me and that it's still existing and we had no mechanism or no system in place to take care of this was really disappointing and upsetting for me. So that began my passion. It didn't begin it, but it definitely fueled it to begin to work with my state legislature, to begin to work on a federal level, and to really, as I'm telling the story, as I'm talking about the gaps, as I'm talking about what I'm seeing, to really use those platforms to just bring a sense of reality, because a lot of times what Heather was talking about earlier about, policy making, right? A lot of times our, legislators are making decisions and creating policy that is unuseful. We all know that. So how can we build this bridge, right? So as a survivor, that's an answer. I like to say that, survivors should be the ones writing history, not the observers, right? So thank you, I'll take that. So for me, I've done a lot, but I just keep doing. And every opportunity I see where there's a change, I can create change because I look for gaps in our systems and how things are being done. And so I could name a lot, but every time I see something like you all do, you see where there's something missing. But sometimes we're just so busy in our lives that we just don't address it because it seems like so much. I address it. And that's what I do. I use my platform to continue to create and bring, just bringing in resources. We have resources, we have people in place, we have systems. And until we actually work through them and begin to monitor them better, then we know what our real gaps are. And so,
and I'll say too, I mean, technology is really a key driver behind the scenes that fuels trafficking. I know we're going to talk about solutions in a minute, but when Tanya and I first met, it was because Department of Homeland Security had invited us to come to one of their offices, and Tanya was speaking about her story and how she was trafficked, and was talking about the realities of children in America being bought and sold on Backpage.com. And during that time, I just thought, this is so crazy. Like, I can't believe there's an online marketplace where this is being facilitated. And I just thought, like, it is incumbent upon us to figure out how we work together with tech companies and with the best and most brilliant minds to eradicate this, right? And really, so it was through our work to take down Backpage, and there's a great documentary called I Am Jane Doe that if you ever have time to watch, you can see that whole story. But I was working for Senator McCain and his wife at the time, and we just thought, now is the time, right? At that time, no one wanted to talk about human trafficking in Washington, D.C. However, I think Mrs. McCain made it very fashionable.
Yeah. and its effect on children, like that was so difficult. I mean, to talk about human trafficking and its effect on adults is one thing, but to actually address how it's affecting kids, that's another beast.
I think we still have those challenges today, but I'll never forget when I see Matt Albence here. He helped us stand up the Angel Watch Center, which he's like, oh, Heather, all I did was sign a piece of paper. But really, like the leadership that we had from the US government, we had all the stars aligned. We had every principal who was just dogged about how do we eradicate human trafficking. We went on to stand up the Center to Counter Human Trafficking within DHS, which is the first operational center to be forward-leaning, to be involved in taking on the bad guys. And there's more work to be done, but I think I'm excited for us to get into kind of the meat of the nexus between the national security risks, because for those of us who come from the international relations community, unless something meets the existential, we tend to ignore it, right?
Yeah, these are all great points, and I heard a lot about the perspectives. I heard a lot about the tools and the technology that's being used. I heard you speak a little bit about the initiatives that both of you have taken on, not just as a person who's working in the space, but even as a survivor, and even as a person who has given a lot of thought to when I see something, like the DHS mantra is, see something, say something. I think Tanya kind of highlighted that it's not just see something, say something, but see something, say something, do something. So can you tell me what you superpower women have been doing aside from the initiatives that you just mentioned, which are great, but I know there's a lot of work going on in this space. Are there any that you want to highlight for us today to talk through for the next couple of minutes before we go into, how people can see themselves and contribute into this space as well?
You want to go first?
You go for it.
I would say coming back to the state level, because I had a nonprofit years ago, and I worked with what happened to me and some other issues like gender-based violence and all of that. So I was just doing a lot of in-the-ground work and working with survivors. Then I ended up on the federal level. And like Heather said, the timing was perfect, because we got a lot done, right? There's a lot of this, but and when I say we got a lot done, what's important is the funds. Like, we can say what we're gonna do all day long, but until there's money that's associated with that, then we're gonna just continue to talk. When I got to serve on the council, that was just some really great work. And then I got to take all that work, banging my head on the wall, watching it bleed, not understanding why people aren't hearing me. And then finally, we're listening and, all of that, right? I was able to come now to the state level and work with our Commonwealth on helping our General Assembly, helping our agencies understand human trafficking, but also how it's affecting our state. And when we're looking at our future, we have to understand when we look at survivors and we talk about how many people have been trafficked, this is going to affect our future. Like, that's a reality. When I just look at someone like me with complex PTSD and, you know, all the other stuff that comes with having such a traumatic past, you know, how are we going to move forward if we, you know, just continue to turn our eyes away from it? So I've been able to work with our governor, and I'm so appreciative to you, the Attorney General. I ran for Virginia House of Delegates a couple years ago, and we ran on the same platform because for me, thank you, I appreciate that. For me, it's about the platform, right? And I understand now that the work that I did here, you know, I could have a greater effect if I use my platform appropriately. Yeah. And that's what it's for. When we go into public office, it's a job of a servant. It's not a job to, you know, where you're trying to make money. That's what it should be, and that's the way it should remain. And so when I began to my talking points were about human trafficking. I mean, like, why would it be about anything else, right? Human trafficking, gender-based violence, you know, that type of thing. It began to garner attention, and so the governor and attorney general began to use the same topics and began to work together. So when I lost by 344 votes, I still won because the AG asked that I come and do the work that I'd done on the federal side onto our state side. And it's been, it's good work because I get to wreak havoc.
Yes.
And my goal is to lay a foundation that cannot be undone. That's my goal. And so that's what I'm up to in our Commonwealth.
Appreciate that. Heather, you want to share something?
Well, after I tested the patience of the 20 federal agencies that I coordinated, I decided to go to the private sector next. So I work for a tech data company. Thomson Reuters is one of the largest data companies in the world. And one of the things that I am so grateful for is that they had brought me on the executive team to think every day about how we can use our technology and our data and our solutions and our tradecraft to counter human rights abuses. So some of the work that we're up to is very tactical. We sit today in the DHS Center to Counter Human Trafficking behind the scenes doing the data science and the analytical work. We're also at the Cyber Crime Center, so we support a myriad of mission areas there, but in particular child exploitation. I can tell you when I first started in this work, I had no idea what Tor was or the Onion. I mean, these people really had to educate me. But I'm so grateful they did because now, fast forward, 12 years, I am sitting with some of the most brightest minds who really can be a force multiplier to law enforcement and prosecutors, right? And can help us navigate these spaces. So one just simple thing that we've worked on in the past 2 years is taking our tools and technology to support the DoD mission on supply chain, looking at intellectual property rights risks, or even just national security risk writ large, and reimagining it to protect human beings from forced labor in our supply chain. So that's one thing. Another is because I have a lot of flexibility to respond to crises as they emerge. We saw the war breaking out in Ukraine with the same horror as the rest of you. But unfortunately, when I went to work in the weeks after the war broke out, one of my analysts came in and said, I need to tell you what I'm seeing. I took half a day's worth of research. I did some OSINT work, and I'm seeing an uptick in the demand for Ukrainian women for sex trafficking and sexual exploitation online. And of course we know this, that this is always what happens when there's some sort of human rights atrocity breaking out, but it was the first time that we could use our data to provide a snapshot to the policymakers. It's not exhaustive, but what I was able to do, armed with that information, is to go to the US government and then the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which was really taking the lead on protecting Ukrainians on the move. And I said, I do not have good news for you, but here's what we're seeing. And we took a baseline study and we monitored that progress, and we still monitor it today. So I'm so excited to say that not only have we been able to put actionable information to somebody's hands is making a difference. But then I convinced our communications and marketing team to do a whole campaign called Be Safe. Mm-hmm. And it is on the front lines of every receiving center in those countries surrounding Ukraine and beyond. It's really practical information. And I can tell you that when I went to the private sector, I thought, I'm not really sure how on board this company is going to be with my ideas. To see them fully embraced, and now we have a front seat at the human rights table, is something that is just really stunning for a private corporation. So if you're here and you're in the private sector and you're thinking, Heather, what can we have to offer? You have so many assets at your disposal that you can really get creative with.
Absolutely. And so, most times when we think and we hear feedback about the Ukrainian war and our challenges in the Pacific, rarely do you hear that conversation, at least in my space, when it's more driven about technology and cybersecurity. Rarely do you hear us, correlating that when, migrants are dropped off at the vice president's door, that there's an indication of uptick of your job keeping you up at night because your phone call is different, right? Okay. That phone call that comes to you is not where are we going to place them. It's really, well, how many children left and then how many arrived and then what happened to those kids and women along the way. So I just want to just kind of give you just an alternate way of thinking about all of the happenings that's happening in the world. And now we're going to transition. You heard me talk about a call to action, but you also heard these dynamic women talk about all of the things that is being executed and put in place in programs, and you heard them say we and I and us. So talk to me about this team theme that I'm hearing you mention. I know we don't do anything individually. We work on teams together. What are some of those mantras that you live by as you're disrupting the perpetrators in this space?
Yeah, well, that's such a great question. I think my posture has always been to work with a team. Unfortunately, I think as women leaders, we are tokenized in the work that we do. We're the first woman to achieve whatever accomplishment. We're the only woman, right? So often I find myself at the table with mostly men. And I think that this sets us up for failure. Because when we tokenize women leaders, we think we have a misunderstanding that there's only one seat at the table. And so what I've seen, especially during my time here in Washington, is that woman who's been tokenized really guards their post. And no one is going to get near it, right? And God forbid you are identified as a rising star, because now you've got a target on your back. So after I was identified as a rising star for X amount of years, I thought I am going to surround myself with people who don't have that king of the hill mentality. And not only I'm going to be inclusive of my staff and my team, but it is my expectation that someday they will eclipse me. I don't want to be the only and first human trafficking czar. I want my team to eventually go on to do amazing things. And so I've had a no mean girl mentality. I actually have like a poster in my office. When people walk in, they're like, what is this, Heather? It has Lindsay Lohan on it with the mean girl standing behind her and a red circle that's like, no mean girls allowed here. Because when we do that, we set ourselves up for failure. You think about scarcity mentality. I've seen all sorts of tactics used because women are really worried. Like, is there enough room at the table for more than one of us? I'm sure Tanya can tell you so many stories about this in her own personal life, but what I've committed to is not just, my last day in the White House. It was funny because I had like a line of women outside my door asking, what do I do next? And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? And to a young woman, they said, well, I guess I don't know what to do. I'm going to go home, and I guess I'll get married and have kids. I'm like, well, is that what you want to do? Because if it is, I will help you pack your things and send you home. But if you want to stay in the arena as your first job working in the White House, this is not my first job. This is your first job working in the White House, then you should stay. Because I'm telling you what, no other 22-year-old dude that's a colleague of yours is thinking, I'm going to pack up and retire and go home and ride off into the sunset. And to each one of those young women, they said, no, I want to stay. I'm like, well, let's find you a job, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's so important to not only leave the door open, either you're walking in or out, doesn't matter. Swing that door open. I think that's a quote from Miss Michelle Obama. That's like something that we have to do. But most importantly is, you heard the panel before us talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and belonging, and all of that is so important. And you just described it all in the descriptor of, well, let you think about what you're saying. I'm not gonna tell you what to do, but I'm gonna tell you what I'm hearing you say and give you an opportunity to think through, is that really what you want to do? And my role at the Marine Corps, I loved calling that empowerment. I'm gonna empower you that it is okay to be scared, it is okay to set goals, lofty goals, and it's okay to highlight the achievements. 22 years old, working in the White House, and yeah, no, I don't know any guy that's gonna say, well, I think I'm gonna go home and have kids now.
I mean, if that's what you want to do, but.
Right? But, Tanya, I'd like to, spend the last couple of minutes just kind of hearing your perspective on some of the either aha moments or just that leadership role and that team mantra from your perspective.
So when I was in my trafficking experience, there was a lot of collaboration, right, and networking. So traffickers definitely work together. Right, and there's a reason for that. They want to keep the business flowing. There's plenty of seats at the table, right? And they have their rules. It's a complete culture, right? It's a thing, and the demand is great. So there's enough, right? Traffickers don't discriminate, right? So when I came out of that situation, I am a go-getter. Like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, whether I have a title, a salary, or whatever. I'm just going to make it happen the best way I can. But then I remembered that, human trafficking is so multifaceted. I mean, it's so complex. There's no way I should think that I can do this by myself. Neither should any other entity think the same way, because the continuum of care for one survivor is so great. How can one person do any of that, right? So it's important and crucial for me, working on whatever level that I am, to talk about collaboration and the teamwork that's necessary. A lot of times people like to look at human trafficking like sexual assault or domestic violence, but I'm here to tell you it is not like that. You can't clump them together and just take one program or the way you do things for those topics, for those issues, and apply it to human trafficking, right? It is very different. And so it takes everyone. We've never been here before. That's another reality. So if we haven't been here before, and then we have this many people who have had this experience or who's experiencing it right now, how can you do this as just like a one entity? And how can you even have that thought that you can? That's unrealistic. And so when we're dealing, with that on our world, and we continue to move forward. I just saw, about Google, I think it was, or the glasses. I don't know if it's Google. I'm sorry if I misspoke, but the whole glasses that's coming out.
This crew will know. They'll know.
Yeah. My thought is always, we're constantly making these forward technological moves without dealing with some of the back stuff that we never dealt with. Human trafficking is called modern day slavery for a reason. Here in America, we started this. Slavery is wrong, but we didn't finish it. Like, can we finish it before we continue to move on? Because we all know. We already can look and know, because we have enough information. We're grown people. We've had experiences. We know that this new technology there's just going to be some unintended consequences or intended consequences, right? And so we still have that to deal with, and it puts pressure on our society. And that's, in my opinion, why we have a lot of mental health issues and you know, and all of that. So, but you know, I can talk for 2 minutes or 2 weeks on this topic because it is near and dear to my heart, and I will always be doing this. I love doing this work, and so I appreciate your time, and thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much, ladies. Your National Human Trafficking Hotline is on the website. There's many different resources that are available for you to not only just learn, but there's many opportunities for you to get involved. Many nonprofits, there's lots of governmental resources. I'll kind of close it out because I'm getting the nod over there. But I want to close it out to say, you know, don't allow yourself to be dumbed down to what's happening around you. See something, say something happened because of 9/11 and people leaving bombs in the many different places where there are large-scale people, whether that's a race, whether that's in the airport, whether that's, you know, the local horse racing, because that's what I'm thinking about doing next week. But no matter what happened, it was see something, say something. And I just like to urge you to not only just see something and say something, but get involved. Don't be afraid to be a seat at the table, but also don't be afraid to be the voice in the room that calls attention to some of the things that we may unconsciously take for granted. The opportunity to have rights and the liberties are, you know, right now, this topic, it is squandered by children who aren't even old enough to tell you you're violating my rights sometimes.
Yeah, and I just want to say, we invite you to come alongside of us, right? Like, I would be remiss if I didn't say, you are on the front lines of this work, whether you know it or not, right? So this is a cyber crime. So we invite you to come alongside of us, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There's so many great ways where you can use your vocation to come to help us.
Well, ladies, this has been a good trouble conversation. Thank you so much for the work that you do in this space and the continued things that you're going to continue to do. Thank you for sharing some of those talking points with our audience today. Give them a round. Thank you.